That was, of course, a clip of George Orwell's 1984. And in totally unrelated news, GB News sources understand that every adult in Britain will require a new government-issued digital ID under plans which will be set out by Sir Keir Starmer later today in a bid, he says, to tackle illegal migration. Let's get the take of GB News contributor Neil Oliver. Neil, you've been talking about this for a very long time, as have I, at least 5 years. There was a terrible inevitability about it, but I always hoped this day would not come, actually. What do you say on a day like this, on an eve like this, when Starmer's going to introduce this tomorrow?
I honestly think we've got them, Bev. I feel uncharacteristically optimistic about it. I've been, desperately furious about the concept of a digital ID card for a long time. And I've been anxious about the possibility of somebody actually daring to bring one forward. But here it is. And I genuinely think that there's enough awareness, more than enough awareness out there in the general population. I sense that there's going to be mass refusal, mass non-compliance. I think this government has rolled the dice, with instructions from on high. I believe the likes of Keir Starmer and his ilk are just factotums. They've had to roll the dice on this, and it's going to be a disaster for them, and will probably conceivably be what brings them down.
We're going to be, just in a moment, I'm going to talk to Peter Edwards, who's in the studio in London, who doesn't have such a strong opinion on the negatives of this as you might do, and myself as well. So just explain to the absolute layman, because these conversations are going to have to take place now, why this is problematic. And if you can, Neil, do it like in terms of the real practicalities rather than the ideology of it.
It's the way in which it brings everything together. Everything together, all of the information about us, everything from health, everything about your finances, everything, anything that you can think of that's out there in the digital sphere is brought together by this kind of platform. And everything can be used in real time to make judgments about you, about what you propose to do. It can reference things that you've said in the past, done in the past. It can use anything at all that's on your record. It can relate to protests maybe that you've attended, to things that you've said, to posts that you've made on social media, to your financial status. And in real time, decisions can be made about whether or not you get permission to do whatever it is that you want to do next. Put fuel in your car, buy a plane ticket, buy a steak in a supermarket, buy a bottle of wine. Whatever it is that you want to do, a decision can be made in advance, because what is happening here with digital ID is effectively you are being replaced with an avatar of yourself. If you imagine one of those little pieces that you move about on a Monopoly board that sort of represents you on the board, well, they have you in that digital ID, and they can decide whether or not you get to move on the board. And your hands are effectively tied behind your back. Anybody that submits to this, anybody that accepts a digital ID is slapping handcuffs around their own wrists. It's the end of freedom, it's the end of choice, it's the worst possible decision that any free-living, freedom-loving person could possibly make. But as I say, I was pessimistic about it for a while, I'm not anymore. We've got them on this. We have them surrounded. Their arguments don't stack up. None of the reasons that they've put forward for doing this make any kind of sense. The very idea that this is going to tackle the people arriving by boats on the shores of the British Isles is absolute nonsense. It was never supposed to do that. The appetite, the desire to bring forward the digital ID was there years ago. And it was understood by the people that wanted to bring it forward that the British people would not accept it. So problems had to be fomented to make people desperate to accept this as a solution. Hence the opening up of the borders and the mass immigration onto these shores that has stoked division, has stoked fear, and the hope has been that people would accept the digital ID as this solution to the problem. But it's entirely bogus. Yeah. All people have to do is not comply, and this thing falls flat on its face. And I am convinced that that is what's going to happen.
I don't know, I like to think that I obviously don't like it, I've made that really clear, but I don't know whether there are enough people who are alert to the potential pitfalls of this, because as we know, GB News is pretty much the only outlet that will give two sides to this story. Let's stay with me, Neil, just for a second. Let's bring in Peter Edwards, former editor of Labelist. Peter, thank you for staying in Paddington to drop into the Late Show this evening. It's good to see you. So this is the Labour government pushing through something which has been bubbling away in the background for a long time. Tony Blair, the architect largely of this project. What do you make of it? Could it be a positive?
It could be. It could be part of the package of measures that help us tackle small boats. So we know that small boats and illegal immigration are the #1 concern of the British public alongside cost of living. So I'd be wary of dismissing it before a bill has even been introduced into the House of Commons. And of course that bill could collapse under the weight of opposition. But I think it will go through in some form. And I've got to push back on what Neil Oliver said, because he conveyed this vision of a kind of Orwellian dystopia that's going to give us all nightmares, even to the extent of the state writing down and recording what we've said. That is not true. That is not what is happening. And it's not what's happening in other countries that have digital ID, like Estonia. Yeah, you're right. Tony Blair Institute, that's a think tank set up by the former Prime Minister, has recommended this for years. But think, I would say, not just for the public concern over small boats and immigration, but all the data that we voluntarily hand over to the state already to make our lives easier. Take me, for example. I earn money talking to folk like you, I pay tax and I have a child, and then you go through things like tax-free childcare and all these schemes, whether you're receiving a benefit or booking a medical appointment for the NHS app and so on and so on. We voluntarily log into stuff and hand over our details to make our life easier. And I was very concerned that Neil was summing up an image of coercion and control by the state when there's no suggestion that's going to happen.
But as you know, Peter Edwards, once you give government powers, they never give them back again. It's interesting that tonight, Jeremy Corbyn has been tweeting that he absolutely rejects the idea of digital ID, at the same time that Nigel Farage is saying that he absolutely rejects digital ID. How do you make sense of that as a Labour man?
Well, Bev, you're always very courteous and friendly to me, but the argument that you're putting forward has collapsed after COVID, because that was the argument against some of the COVID restrictions 5 years ago, that it would be the slippery slope to more state control after our life. In fact, all the COVID restrictions have been swept away. So that argument that it's a slippery slope to more control collapses.
But we're here. This is the control, Peter. This is what the vaccine passports were the rehearsal for, and they didn't push it through, in no small part thanks to a few very loud public voices that woke up enough of the population to realise that it was going to be taking away a lot of control, a lot of their freedoms, and putting a lot of controls upon the individuals of the UK. That's the only reason we haven't had it already. The EU have been marching forward with this. It's another reason I think why it's good to not be in the EU, because we would have been there already. Just give me an idea then, Peter. Tell me this before we go. Who's your least favourite politician, either living or dead?
I'm not sure you're asking about whether it's a story in Friday's papers, but
look what I have!
Aw, he's adorable.
He wags his tail and what?
So what I'm saying is, imagine you've got your digital ID on your phone. It can look at everything you do. It can control where you go, who you see, what you can buy, how you can travel. And Boris Johnson is in control of that. That, my friend, is where we have to use our imagination as to where digital ID goes.
Boris would lose it down the back of a sofa, so I'll rest easy on that one.
Very possibly. Peter Edwards, always nice to see you. Stay with me, and Neil Oliver as well. Thank you so much for your time this evening.